بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Welcome back to lecture 3 in our mini introduction to Tassawuf course that is inaugurating this new channel. In the last lecture, the last two lectures were really more of like an academic introduction, but I just want to pick up one little sentence from last lecture, and then inshallah we'll talk about actual Tasawwuf today, which is when we talked about the subject, al-mawdu'a. We said the definition that I put forth is the works of the heart that relate to reaching the level of ihsan. Okay, well, what does that mean? It's nice to say that and to memorize that, but what does that actually mean? So we talked about in the hadith of Gabriel. Okay, so this is one more reference to the academic stuff, I'm sorry, and then we will start on Tasawwuf. We learned in the hadith of Gabriel that there is a discussion of orthopraxy, correct conduct, which we refer to inside Islam as the Sharia. The sciences that inform what we do are outward actions. And then we talked about the sciences or the discipline that relates to what we believe, orthodoxy, which is ilm al-kalam, usul al-din, etc. And then there is the issue of tasawwuf. So the sharia addresses our actions, the aqidah addresses our belief, tasawwuf addresses the heart. So to understand what that means, we have to ask the question, and here we are, inshallah we begin. What actually is our makeup? What is the Islamic view of who we are as a human being? So there are three distinct components that constitute our creation. The first is the physical body, al-jasad, and obviously the physical body is the physical body, and there are different sizes and shapes and colors and weights and all of that kind of stuff, and we age, and everything around us is a body in the sense that we see the physicality of everything around us, al-jasad. And then there is something called ar-ruh, there's something called the soul. The soul is placed in the body and gives the body life. So we know that when, for example, the Prophet ﷺ was asked, when were you a prophet? He said, كُنْتُ نَبِيًّا وَآدَمُ بَيْنَ الرُّوحِ وَالْجَسَدِ. I was a prophet when Adam was between the physical form and the soul, meaning the soul had not been placed in the physical body yet. In that regard, we share that existence with the creatures of the world, the animals and whatnot, because they are a body, physical body, and in them is a soul. And when the soul comes out of the body temporarily, that means we are sleeping, and then the soul comes back in, we wake up. And when the soul is removed from the body permanently, then that is death. And we share that with the other creatures. وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ, Allah Ta'ala says, they ask you about the soul. قُلُ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. قُلُ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. The soul is from the command of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. وَمَا أُوتِيتُ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. You have not been given knowledge but a little. So we don't know much about the soul other than what I just said, which is like a high level summary. Of course there are some other details. One important detail is that the ruh, the soul, is considered a subtle body. Jismun khafif. It is a subtle body, whereas our physical body that you see here is a jismun khafif, jismun kathif. It is a thick body. So you see it has color and mass. But the soul is something that is a little bit subtle, but it is a thing nonetheless. It is a created thing from the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then the Quran posits a third component, which is an-nafs, the self. So for the purposes of our order and this channel, that's sort of the language that we use, the nafs. Now what is the nafs? The nafs is that component inside us that gives us our ability to articulate, to speak, to reason, to think, to understand. You can refer to it as the intellect if you want, but to refer to it as the intellect is to kind of restrict the meaning of what it is. And the nafs, we say in the language of tasawwuf and aqidah, they say an-nafsul natiqa, the articulating self, an-nafs al-mudrika, the perceiving self. And it is that nafs that is placed in us upon which comes the revelation of the Quran that gives us moral responsibility. So when Allah says, Ya ayyuhan nas, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, therefore we are the recipients of that address. So we can hear and we can obey, or we can hear and, God forbid, we can disobey. So it gives us our free will, it gives us our ability to comply or not comply, and therefore we are morally responsible. If that nafs was not there, or if that nafs has not matured like in a child or an infant, then that person is not mukallaf, that person is not morally responsible. So moral responsibility for us starts at the age of puberty, for boys and girls. Well, what if somebody is insane, either temporarily or permanently? Well, there is no taklif because there's no ability to articulate. Well, how about if somebody's asleep? Well, when you're asleep, you're not responding. So at that moment of sleep, there's no taklif. So technically, you're not responsible for what you do when you sleep. I mean, to a certain extent. So just trying to highlight the idea that it is the nafs in us that gives us our ability to be morally responsible. So we are body, soul, and nafs. Now, to make things a little bit more confusing, because we don't know a lot about the ruh, some writers of Tassawuf refer to the nafs as the ruh, and some writers of Tassawuf refer to the nafs as al-qalb. Even I did that yesterday in the lecture when I said, let me just repeat the sentence, that the subject matter of Tassawuf is the works of the heart, as it relates to reaching the level of ihsan. Now, this is a common thing, it's not a mistake, it's very common because the ruh is not so much a part of the discussion of Tassawuf. What is the discussion is the nafs, for the reasons that I will mention very, very shortly. So therefore, you have to pay attention that what is the word that is used by the author, everyone has their own vocabulary, so you can't criticize someone's vocabulary. But if somebody talks about al-qalb, then you know based on this little introduction that I'm providing, it's really the nafs. If someone says the nafs, it's the nafs, so on and so forth. And the nafs is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, that the nafs is of different kinds. There are different levels of the nafs. Allah Ta'ala at sometimes in the Quran He refers to the nafs as a nafsul ammara bisu, the nafs that constant. Ammara fa'ala means to constant. It's sigha al-mubalagha. It's the rhetorical structure of the form, to constantly. So the nafsul ammara bisu, it's always calling you to bad action. And then there's a nafs al-lawama. It's the reproachful self, the blameworthy self. So you do something bad and then it's like, you feel bad. So you're better than the one before it because you feel bad, but you're still in the sin. And then there's a nafs al-mulhama, the inspired self. There's a nafs al-radiyah, the serene self. A nafs al-murdiyah, the contented self. A nafs al-mutma'inna, the nafs or the self found pleasing. And then there is a nafs al-kamila, the complete self. So all of those minus a nafs al-kamila, the last one, are all direct language that are taken from the Quran. And then the kamila is the final spot. So coming back to what I'm saying about body, soul, and nafs, and body, soul, and self, you can be the worst version of yourself, God forbid, and we know that we've been there at times. And then you can be a beautiful version of yourself. So the nafs changes. Even though the nafs's quality to articulate and to reason, and to speak and whatnot, it's still there. But the quality of the nafs could be very good or to be very bad. So, because the nafs is of different kinds, the subject of tasawwuf addresses how we can move the nafs from the lowest level to the highest level. That's the process of tazkiyah. So when we talk about tazkiyah and purification or ahsan, to use the language of the hadith, and ta'budullah ka'annaka tarah fa in lam takun tarah fahuwa yarak, then what we are talking about is how do we move the nafs from the lowest level to the highest level. Because the nafs at the lowest level will manifest itself in a certain, will constantly do bad things. Those are the people that do bad things. Those are the people that conspire to do bad things. Those are the people that, turn crime into an art form. They are the people that are, we might refer to them as sociopathic, or people that are serial killers, or, people that don't have any remorse. Those type of languages that we use for us as Muslims when we come to use the language of tasawwuf, the language of the discipline of tasawwuf. We say, okay, that person, he's just the worst version of himself. But that version, often that person can also be reformed, because everyone has the capacity for their nafs to move from the lowest level to the highest level. That's exactly what the science of tasawwuf is. Now remember the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that's narrated in, I think it's Al-Hakim. They were coming back from a battle, and he said, we're leaving the lesser battle, al-jihad al-asghar, and now we're entering al-jihad al-akbar. We just fought and we lost our comrades in arms, they died on the battle. What's harder than that? He said, fighting against your own self. That's the greater jihad. Why? Because you're always you. You can't not be you. So when you realize that, you wake up in the morning, you look in the mirror, that's the enemy, in the sense that that's the work. Let's not say enemy, that's the work. The work is you. You have to be the best version of yourself. So the science of tasawwuf, which will, how we do that will be in tomorrow's lecture or the next lecture. Obviously, I got to split it up. I can't all talk about it all at once. But how then do you move from low, to better to high? Now, I should also mention, because this is kind of academic, scholarly introduction / obviously specific to our order, but there are different opinions about how many levels of the nafs there are. The most basic understanding is that there's three, bad, medium, and good. And that's fine, because a lot of these articulations of the differences of the nafs between this level and that level, sometimes they're so subtle that some of the ulama say it's really just different shades of the same nafs. It's either very bad, you're in the middle, or you're good. And that's fine. In our tariq, we talk about the 7 levels of the nafs, because when we come to talk about the dhikr that's attached to addressing those, we have 7 core names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we use. So, hence we use the number 7. But it's irrelevant in the sense that we need to know that we are body, soul, and nafs. That's universally how Islam teaches about what we are. And that you need to know that the body is the physicality that we see, upon which can be the different categories that we study in the science of Aristotle. I have them in my notes, but I just thought it'd be a little too academic to get into logic. And then the soul is the battery that gives life to the body. You can think of it's a subtle substance. We don't know much about it, as the Quran teaches us. And then the nafs is us, right? It's what allows us to do what we're doing now, is to speak and to understand and to ask questions and to learn and whatnot. And the nafs is of different kinds. That's the key teaching that Islam is providing us, is the Islamic revelation, that you can be a really bad version of yourself, unfortunately, and you can also be a very luminous person. Now, when you understand that and you look at some of the Sahaba, for example, like if you think of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, there's the famous story that he was crying and then immediately he started to laugh. And they're like, well, that's strange. What made you cry and what made you laugh? And he said, I remember in the time before Islam, I made an idol out of dates and then I prostrated to the idol, so I cried. And then I recalled that I got hungry, so I ate my idol because it was made out of dates. So he started to laugh. Well, how can somebody who does that, be al-Faruq? Or all of those early Sufis that you read about in the first kind of introduction to the Risala of Imam al-Qushayri radiallahu anhu. All of those luminary figures. Many of them were bad people that reformed themselves, bad people that made tawbah. Some of them were not even Muslim and they found their way to Islam, were bad, and then they became even better. So the idea is that Tassawwuf teaches us that we can be a magnificent version of ourselves. And then therefore that's the work, that's the jihad. The greater struggle is being the best version of yourself. Now, of course, we fluctuate between the nafs and the levels of the nafs. I mean, that's just part of life, and that's okay. But the consistency of the practice of tasawwuf, which we'll talk about in the next lecture, which is dhikr and fikr, invocation and contemplation or meditation, by being consistent in that, and indeed consistent in our daily obligations of prayer and our yearly obligation of fast and zakat and whatnot, we kind of stabilize the fluctuation of the nafs between bad and good and so on and so forth. So last little thing I want to mention, which is, again, one of those things I debated, do I include it in an introductory kind of level thing or not? This one I will include, is that remember how I said in the first couple lectures, I tried to emphasize the point that tasawwuf is based on the Quran and Sunnah, obviously, the way all of the Islamic sciences are, in addition to the experience of the people before us. So this is one of those places where the experience of the people before us will sort of manifest itself and you see the benefit of it. Many of the ulama of tasawwuf, particularly the ulama of the Naqshbandi order and the Naqshbandi tradition and the Khalwati tradition, I have found that they write about this more than others. It exists other places. And at some point, maybe lecture 4 or 5, we will talk about the plurality of the Sufi orders being an outward manifestation of really there's only one way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I want to just flag that point. We'll come back to it. They articulated that as a person moves from one level of the self to the next level of the self, there is a sensation that happens in kind of like the mid place of the chest, that you feel something as you are doing your invocation. and they called these the five subtle ones, al-lata'if al-khamsa. The first one is al-qalb. The second one, I'm just going to say them in Arabic. The second one is al-ruh. The third one is al-sir. The fourth one is al-khafay. And the fifth is al-akhfa. So the qalb is a translation of the word heart. Al-ruh is a translation of the word soul. Al-sir is the secret. Al-khafay is the hidden. Al-akhfa is the more hidden. And they actually said that there are places, there are five physical locations around your physical heart, that as you are moving from one level to the next, you kind of feel a sensation in one area to the next. Now that opens up a whole nother set of literature, that how does a person look like on the inside when they are at a certain level of the nafs? They also talked about that. Some people are attracted to melodious sounds in one level of the nafs versus another. Some people see certain colors at one level of the nafs or another. You also have a matching of the hagiography, or not the hagiography, but a matching of the stations of the prophets with the stations of the nafs. So at one level of nafs, they say this is associated with this prophet, so on and so on. You find a lot of that, for example, in the writings of Ibn Arabi, radiallahu anhu, Shaykh al-Akbar. And then when they talk about the lata'if, the five subtle ones, they say that these also mirror the five subtle stations that are in the celestial realms, al-malakut. So there is a relationship between our dhikr and our improvement in our path and our march towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to rectify the nafs. There is a door that is open between our spiritual heart and the heavens. Just like there's a door open between our spiritual heart and the world around us. So right now, the door towards one another is open because you're watching this and I'm recording this and you're hopefully interacting, thinking, asking questions, critiquing what I'm saying, etc. But then when you come to pray, or when like you're fasting, or when you do tahajjud or reading Quran, you kind of close the door to the people, the world around you, and then you open the door, the vertical door to the celestial realm. So there's also a lot of writing, I'm not going to get into any of that, but there is writing that talks about that relationship between the dunya, the mulk, what we see in the observable universe, and the malakut, the unobservable part of the universe, of the celestial realms. And that all is just kind of springing from this idea of the lata'if al-khamsa. So just to highlight that the ulama of Tassawuf were ulama, they were real scholars, and they took this subject really to the vast, they dove very deep into the vast oceans of Islamic mysticism and Tassawuf, and talked about, look, no, you can actually feel certain things, see certain things. Sometimes there are colors, I might have forgot to mention that, there are colors associated with different levels of the nafs. In our tariq, we're not so much concerned with that, other than we know that literature exists. What we're more concerned with is just following the Quran and Sunnah and doing the dhikr. But I want you to know that there's a rhyme and reason behind that, inshaAllah. Okay, so body, soul, nafs. Nafs can be of different versions. The point of tasawwuf is to help rectify the nafs so it can move from the lowest version to the highest version. That is the path that one commits to for the rest of their life. And I'll put a pin in it here, and we'll continue in the next lecture. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.